everybody. Welcome to Biomedical Ethics. All right, so we spent a lot of time uh, over the week discussing what bioethics is, defining our terms, and sort of demarcating the boundaries of the field of bioethics. And today we'll continue building on that foundation that we'll be drawing upon for the rest of the semester by placing bioethics in historical context and by discussing principlism, which is the premier bioethical approach that's utilized in medicine in the context of the United States today. So I'll be placing bioethics in historical context, defining principlism, and then introducing you to the four principles that make up principlism, hence the name, right? Autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. Now, these may sound like Greek right now, but we'll be sure to dig more deeply into each and define them well. Okay, so let's place bioethics in historical context. Bioethics is not new. Physicians have followed a professional ethic since the time period when medicine separated itself from both religion and from philosophy, or what they call ritual. So Hippocrates penned the Hippocratic Oath between 400 and 300 BCE. And interestingly, Hippocrates was the first medical professional to argue that medicine should be its own field, that it should be separated from all other professions. And after arguing that it should be a separate field, directly after that came his argument that medicine should also be governed by a professional ethic. So the Hippocratic Oath was his attempt to write a professional ethic that all physicians should follow. And in short, this required a physician to swear by healing gods, hence the medical symbol that we use today, to uphold specific ethical standards, including do no harm. Now, why is this? Why did Hippocrates argue that an ethical standard should be in place? Well, I think the uncle of Spider-Man said it best, that with great power comes great responsibility. Physicians are able to heal and do wonderful feats. However, these tool sets could also be used in problematic manners and could also cause harm as well. So with great power comes great responsibility, and an ethic is needed, at least according to Hippocrates. And we'll see, according to other boards and medical professionals, moving forward into the ages. So fast forward to the 1800s, the Hippocratic Oath, it's been expanded by more extensive and by regularly updated ethical codes that are intended to provide ethical guidance for specific contexts and for specific time periods. Medicine changes, society changes, economic structures change, etc. And these prompt the need for an updated ethic. So in 1847, the American Medical Association penned its first code of medical ethics. And as you'll see in the podcast for next week, ethics still plays a key role in the AMA and continues to. And there is a code of medical ethics today, right? The British General Medical Council's Good Medical Practice was penned, and it guided medical decision-making, especially in the clinical setting, in the British Isles since its enactment. And then fast forward to the 1970s, to the context of the United States, and we have the Belmont Report, and we have a wide range of policies that guide human research, animal research in the case of IACUC, human research IRB, and we have a thriving professional ethic that medical professionals ascribe to in this context. And this is just a little bit of foreshadowing as the Belmont Report plays a key role in the history of bioethics, but also in the history and the development of principlism, as we will see. All right, so this expansion in the development of the bioethical codes and professional ethics from the time of Hippocrates up to the Belmont Report in the 70s, and then we can talk about how principlism has changed and molded, and different bioethical codes of conduct have also changed and molded since the 1970s. Instead of focusing on not principlism, on paternalism or beneficence, for example, we may be highlighting autonomy as a key principle. But we'll get into how the principles interplay in the future. But I do want to note here, the expansion is indicative of the struggle of bioethics to provide ethical guidance in an increasingly changing world. And bioethics deals with a number of important questions that we as a society are grappling with, and that are being grappled with at the global level as well. As the Neil deGrasse Tyson podcast illustrated, designer babies are a concern, the application of CRISPR. Should we be modifying our seeds and breeds? And if so, how? How should we be modifying them? What modifications are acceptable? And there are questions concerning reproductive rights, assisted reproductive technologies or art, physician-assisted suicide. How should we be dealing with end-of-life issues? Different states have come down in different positions on physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other questions concerning end-of-life decision-making. And of course, in the age that we're living in, pandemics, right? We have pandemics that were unheard of in Hippocrates' time, that are causing large-scale global impacts and require a global response. So how do we navigate the ethical issues that arise due to these pandemics? How do we deal with limited medical resources? How best do we ration resources, or how best do we distribute resources if we don't have enough resources for everyone? And who gets to decide these questions? All of these burning issues fall under the umbrella of bioethics. Now, one way or one approach to answering these questions involves utilizing the theoretical framework, an ethical framework called principlism. This is the primary approach today, a leading approach to providing guidance in our current context. I want to spend a few minutes just placing principlism in historical context and discussing the roots of principlism, because these roots are imperative and play a key role in the makeup or the design of the four principles that we utilize today. So first, principlism grew out of a call that occurred during World War II with one of our presidents, Franklin Roosevelt, and he argued that we need a new ethic for use in the United States context, and a medical ethic, because his office was inundated with a wide range of medical concerns that he felt he did not have the tools to adequately address. So during World War II, they're drafting a lot of soldiers into the U.S. military. So there's a huge military and that have medical needs. So how do we address the medical needs of the military while still maintaining adequate medical facilities in the context of the United States proper, outside of the military? How do we coordinate medical science? Prior to World War II, research was done on a relatively limited basis. Just to give you an example, prior to World War II, the numbers of animals utilized in research settings numbered in the thousands, whereas currently we have billions of animals being utilized for research purposes, right? So we saw a bloom of medical science. How do we coordinate this, right? And how do we address ethical issues that arise in both human and animal experimentation contexts? What about the allocation of resources? In the 1920s, we see a huge increase in the population, a population boom. So we have a larger population and we have a limited number of resources. So how do we um, ration resources and how do we distribute said resources? And again, just to harken back to the earlier point, who gets to decide how the resources are distributed? What is the decision-making policy in place? And is this fair? Is this equitable? End-of-life care. In addition to a larger population, we're also seeing people live longer than ever. Right? How do we address end-of-life care issues? What does this look like? What is an ethical way to deal with the dying? And again, ethics concerning experimentation. In addition to the bloom of medical science, medical research, we also have several gross injustices occurring in human experimentation contexts. So how do we ensure that these do not happen again? So Franklin Roosevelt is calling for a bioethics to be in place in the United States. Now, in addition, just to hearken on the ethics concerning experimentation, we do have several gross injustices occurring in human experimentation contexts, and these push for, in the case of the Nuremberg Code, a universal code of conduct that should be adopted by all researchers performing a human experimentation. So what I'd like to do is just show you 4 minutes discussing the infamous twin studies in World War II, and then we'll discuss the Nuremberg Code that was designed to ensure that such studies did not occur again.
I was born in 1934, one of a pair of twins. Miriam and I were the third and fourth children in the family. We lived in a very small village in Transylvania, Romania. We got down from the cattle car. People were selected to live or to die. People crying, pushing, shoving, dogs barking, trying to make some sense of that place. And I actually turned around in trying to figure out what is that place. Never seen a place like that before. And as I turned around, I realized that my father and my two older sisters were gone. Never saw them again. We were holding on to mother for dear life. A Nazi was running in the middle of that selection platform, yelling in German, twins, twins. He noticed us and demanded to know if we were twins. And my mother asked, is that good? And the Nazi said yes. My mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother to the right. We were pulled to the left. We were crying. She was crying. And all I ever remember is seeing my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even said goodbye to her, but I did not understand that this would be the last time that we would see her. And all that took 30 minutes from the time we got down from the cattle car and my whole family was gone. Only Miriam and I were left holding hands and crying. We were Mengele twins, which we found out later on what that meant. Mengele would count us every morning, and he wanted to know how many guinea pigs he had this day. I was used in 2 types of experiments. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They would put me naked in a room with my twin sister and many other twins up to 8 hours a day. They would measure every part of my body, compare it to my twin sister, and then compare it to chart. On alternate days, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, they would take us to a blood lab. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a minimum of 5 injections in the right arm. The content of those injections we didn't know then, nor do we know today. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever. My legs and arms were swollen and very painful. I was trembling as the August sun was burning my skin, and I had huge red spots covering my body. The next visit to the blood lab, they didn't tie my arms. Instead of that, measure my fever. And I was immediately taken to the hospital. The hospital was another barrack, but it was filled with people who looked to me more dead than alive. Next morning, Mengele came in with 4 other doctors, never ever examined me, looked at my fever chart, and then he declared, "Too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." For the following 2 weeks, I have only one clear memory: crawling on the barrack floor because I no longer could walk, and crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. And as I was crawling, I would fade out in and out of consciousness, telling myself, "I must survive, I must survive." After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I felt immediately a lot stronger. It took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal. Miriam, when I got back, she was sitting on the bed, staring into space. When I asked her what happened to you, she said, "I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it." And we didn't talk about Auschwitz until 1985. And I asked her in 85, "Miriam, do you remember?"
Okay. So the doctors that were instrumental in several experiments like this were tried for war crimes in the Nuremberg trials, and these were a series of military tribunals held by the Allied forces after World War II. And one of the, in addition to the trials, one of the responses to these unjust research studies was the Nuremberg Code. And the Nuremberg Code was developed to help guard against such research practices being utilized in the future. This is a set of research ethics principles that were used to guide human experimentation after the Second World War. So you do not need to know these specific ones for the midterm exam. I just want to reiterate that. But I do want to show you these because they highlight or illustrate sort of the beginnings of the development of the 4 principles that make up principalism. So for example, the very first point of the Nuremberg Code: required is the voluntary, well-informed understanding consent of the human subject in a full legal capacity. So here we see respect for research subjects' choices, and for, in the case of the clinical setting, a patient's choices, their ability to make decisions that guide their care, or their ability to opt in and out of research contexts is key. Autonomy plays a key role here. And if we go down, human subjects must be free to immediately quit the experiment at any point when they feel physically or mentally unable to go on. So again, a research subject is able to both decide whether or not they wish to be a part of the study and decide at any point whether they wish to be removed from said study. So again, Respect for patient choices and autonomy are key. We also see beneficence. The experiment should aim at positive results for society that cannot be procured in some other way. So experimentation should not be done for superfluous reasons, and it should be aimed at bringing about some good. We have do no harm here, again, hearkening back to Hippocrates. It should not be conducted when there is any reason to believe that it implies a risk of death or disabling injury. So we see here sort of the beginnings of the development of principles that guide both human research and medical decision making or medical care today. So fast forward, we have the Nuremberg Code. This is in place. However, this is not sort of universally applied in the United States context. It wasn't until the 1970s when the Tuskegee syphilis study became well known and there was a public outcry that U.S. Congress decided to develop a specific code of ethics for a human experimentation. And it's this code of ethics in the Belmont Report that is the foundational document for principalism and bioethics today. So I just have a brief video that goes over the Tuskegee syphilis study.
In July of 1972, the Washington Star newspaper broke the story about the controversial Tuskegee Institute syphilis experiment. For 40 years, from 1932 until 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service, in partnership with Tuskegee, secretly studied the effects of untreated syphilis in African American men in Alabama. 600 black men, 399 with syphilis and 201 without the disease, were induced to participate in the experiment. Nearly all of them were poorly educated, impoverished sharecroppers. In exchange for participating, they were promised free medical exams, hot meals, and a burial stipend. The men with syphilis were not told they were infected and were not treated, even after penicillin was discovered to be an effective cure for the disease in the 1940s. Over the course of the experiment, 128 participants died of syphilis or syphilis-related complications. In 1972, when the paper exposed the details, the experiment was still ongoing. It incited public outrage over the unethical treatment of the participants, which led to the experiment's termination that November. The following year, the NAACP filed suit on behalf of the survivors. The federal government settled the lawsuit for $10 million. It also agreed to provide survivors and their infected family members with free medical services.
Okay, so once the public found out about the Tuskegee syphilis study, there was public outrage. And as a result of this public outrage, this prompted the U.S. Congress to pass what's called the National Research Act. Now, the National Research Act provides guidelines for IRB, et cetera, and this is in connection with IACUC as well. That's the Animal Welfare Act that deals with animal research. However, the U.S. National Research Act set specific standards in play. And they created a commission that was created to outline principles that must be followed during research with human subjects in the context of the United States. Now, the result of this commission was the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report outlined principalism and focused on three principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Respect for persons was then subsequently demarcated into two more refined principles: the principle of autonomy, respecting the choices of a research subject, and in the case of clinical context, of patients; non-maleficence, again hearkening back to the 2,000 plus year history of medical ethical codes. We have non-maleficence or do no harm, and throughout this course you can call this principle either or, non-maleficence or do no harm. So we have this mandate to not intentionally harm patients. When we have beneficence, do that which brings about the greatest good, or that which benefits or brings about welfare, or promotes the welfare of patients. And we have justice. How are the benefits and harms of the research study being distributed? Are they being distributed in an unethical or an unjust manner? So we have these four principles that sort of formed the seed of professional medical ethics today and of principlism proper. All right, so I just want to make just as a side note, principlism is what's called an ethical pluralist position. And this is the idea, this is an ethical approach that recognizes that several normative concerns could be at play at any time in specific contexts. So for example, if you're a medical professional, you will want to promote the welfare of your patient, right? And that is of normative importance. Benefiting your patient is important. However, respecting their choices and their ethical decision making is also important, even up to the point where they can refuse care. So that's another part. Doing no harm, not causing harm or intentionally harming your patient. That's a third concern. And all of these concerns have normative importance in that context, and they're things that we need to weigh, as medical professionals. Now, ethical pluralist positions are in contrast to ethical absolutist positions. And this is the idea that you can have one ethical theory, apply it to any context, and it will provide you with the ethical action to do. So, for example, a utilitarian would argue that you should do that which produces the greatest benefit for the greatest number. And we'll get into utilitarianism more so next week, but that's an absolutist position. All we need to do is apply the principle of utility. It will give us the right answer, and then we can move forward. Whereas principlism provides a more nuanced approach and recognizes that there are several concerns that could arise. Okay, so I want to briefly go over the four principles that make up principlism, that form both the ethical code and human research contexts, and in professional ethics as well. So we have respect for a person's decision-making capacity, for their autonomy, and this is called a respect for autonomy. And this is respecting the ability of patients and research subjects to act in a self-determined manner. Again, hearkening back to the Nuremberg Code. Research subjects should be given the opportunity to opt in and opt out of research. You should respect their choices. So this is a right of a rational person to make decisions. And so there are several sub-principles that fall under respecting a patient's autonomy, such as obtaining informed consent. In order to exercise your ability to make decisions, you need to be informed, right? So providing or disclosing information, enough information to make an informed decision, is key. So obtaining informed consent, supporting patients' treatment option choices, including DNRs and the refusal of treatment, respecting patients' privacy, HIPAA. These all fall within respect for autonomy. And we'll dive more deeply into autonomy in the future, but I just want to introduce you to this key concept here. In addition, we have beneficence, take actions that benefit or promote the wellness or well-being of patients. And this is key. So you should not do actions that do not cause or do not bring about wellness. That wellness or benefiting your patient should be, in mind when engaging with patients and in the research context. Non-maleficence, it's the obligation to do no harm. So again, hearkening back to Hippocrates, there's this idea that we should intentionally not do harm. And I'm so glad that they made a Maleficent 2, so now this picture is relevant again. So we have autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence. And fourth, we have the principle of justice. And this asks us to tarry with, or asks us to engage with the question of whether the risks and benefits of studies and healthcare policies are equally distributed among the population. Are they distributed in an equitable manner? Is one group shouldering more of the risks and not receiving the benefits? And if so, this is a violation of justice. And again, this comes out again and again when we talk about healthcare policy, when we discuss how healthcare systems are designed. In addition, rationing falls under this. So how are limited resources being distributed? And are they being distributed in an equitable manner? And questions concerning justice and distribution have played a key role in discussions concerning pandemic responses, for example. So we see these coming to the forefront. So those are a brief introduction. Those are the 4 principles that make up principalism. We'll be applying them throughout the semester. One thing that you can do for this week's discussion forum is apply them to the Tuskegee syphilis study. I ask you to tarry with this question and to think a little bit more about how these 4 principles play an important role in the medical context, but how, and the research context, and how they were violated in this specific study. So thank you very much. There we go. So many case studies in so little time. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. I will be available. I also have office hours on Wednesday. So thank you guys. Take care.